be a good idea if Q and I did a session like this. I'm going to go through 3 examples for Cypress Component Testing versus React Testing Library from a familiar application, Tour of Heroes, written in React. That's from the book I released a few weeks ago called CCTDD. We'll share all the links to the code and everything in the chat. Q will do 3 examples for Cypress Component Testing versus Angular's Karma. So you'll get to see some details about how does this thing look at some sort of a scale. Let me share my desktop and let me know if everything's visible. Working? Yeah, Q?
Yep, I can see. Yep.
You can see, all right, perfect. So I'm going to start with a component called Etherbar brand. I'll just show that component right here. So right now, there isn't even any test. I commented out all the code. All we're doing is mounting the components. And on the right side, we have Cypress Component Testing. On the left side, we have React Testing Library. So we just mounted the code. And here's the game changer, right? There's none of the rest of my application. I can see just my component in isolation. I didn't have to make anything else work. I can go and inspect the component just like I would do in my full application, right? I can see that there is a link with an icon there, right over there. There's an href. I can see the nav link over there. I can see the 3 spans, the text. Right? If there was any network action, I would see that. I have React DevTools over here. Then I can see everything that's happening in the background there. So I can nav through there. Right? I can find my component, properties, everything. So you have full access to that. There's only one gotcha with that. React DevTools doesn't really clear a state. So if you keep rerunning, that's going to pile up. So we'll just have to restart everything from scratch. We have the full Cypress time travel debugging. Of course, there's nothing here. We're just mounting, right? But if something was happening, we'll be able to see that later on. If you even wanted to, just like you would be debugging your application. So the source component is right here. Doesn't do much, it's rendering something. If you wanted to, you could just enter a debugger statement here, right? Ignore the ESLint, save, and all you'd have to do is just have your DevTools open, just like a regular browser. You could even do this in an end-to-end test, and restart the test. And as soon as you hit that line, you will have your debugger, right? So no test yet. This is just developer experience supporting you with your engineering. That's all. Let's continue. That. Again. All right, this is not defined. I left something over there. Oh, yes, I did. There we go. All right, beautiful. So let's just look at these tests side by side, line by line. So let me know if everything is zoomed in enough, right? See that it's a little too much. All right, so maybe you should look at this mount command, right? Let's just go see what that's about. So Cypress comes with the mount command out of the box. It will be in your component PS file. This is my custom wrapper. We don't even need this right now, right? We're not even using that. So it comes with this much. And in every framework, there is going to be some mount command. And if maybe you have like some complex components where you don't want to keep wrapping the applications like you would do in your source application. So for me, that is app.tsx here, right? So I have query client, error boundary, suspense, browser writer, all this stuff. However, you're mounting your real components. That's how you're going to mount it in a Cypress component test with React. So here I wrote a custom wrapper, right? And I'm not even using that here, but just to show you that the idea is 100% the same thing that you would do with React Testing Library. So if you go to test utils, look at the custom render that I have for React Testing Library, they're basically the same thing, right? There's some wrappers that make it easy to mount, so you don't have to have this large mount commands for all these wrappers. Just get out of there. So we covered that one. Let's just go through the APIs one-on-one, right? So the first thing we're doing is we're making sure that this component is being rendered, right? And the way we do that is just with a custom selector. It's very similar to doing something with find by test ID. So I make sure that React Testing Library is using data sci, so that I have this common selector. You can customize it any way you want. So we're making sure that, hey, there's this header bar brand link over here. Now we're going to make some assertion in it. So you can imagine, maybe you're creating this component from scratch. You're doing some TDD. And first you're writing these tests, and then you're trying to make it so that that link has some href attribute, some target attribute, and rel attribute, right? And you will see that immediately over in the as you save. On the React testing library side, you created that. You can realize the async await syntax, and the assertions look quite similar, right? In fact, they could even be more similar. Let's just look at we looked at the Cypress version of it, so we can just screen debug. This is basically our candlelight into the test using React testing library. So let's just open this guy here, and we can see some icon there. Yeah, some SVG. Okay, a little noisy there, but we can still recognize the 3 spans with the classes and the text here. So this is the difference in the feedback you get. This was great when that was all we had, but now we have the real thing, right? So this is the #1 game changer. We were talking about the assertion styles, right? There's this should syntax. So Cypress has 4, and here is the worst option, which is basically the same thing as the one on the left. So then, and then you can do the assertion syntax. You'll see slightly different style between try, expect syntax and just, but it's close enough. Why is this the worst? Because you don't need this in this component here. But with this syntax, there's no retry capability. So Cypress, one of the features that sets it apart is this built-in function retry capability. If you change that then to should, then all these statements will retry for a set amount of time. By default, that's 4 seconds, but you can improve it. So this will be one-on-one equivalent, maybe, right? If you had to use then, why would you have to use then? Let's say you would have something synchronous here, right, that you're doing. You don't want to assert, but you still wanted these things to retry. You could do something like the below. So we just wrap that and then start chaining from what you wrap, so it would retry. So those are just the 3 other varieties of doing assertion syntaxes, just so everyone's familiar. This isn't expounded so much, but that's an amazing trick to take advantage of that retry capability. I prefer the try should syntax because it reads so nicely, like plain English. Once you get used to it, everything else will be lackluster. So let's go to the next step. We'll just demo the within API here. So all we're doing is we're grabbing this header bar brand, the same link, and then we're saying, hey, within that, right, there's going to be some React icon SVG, and the equivalent of doing that thing in the same RTL side is with the within and this kind of a syntax. So that's one-on-one translate pretty well. Let's go to the second test now. So it says should verify internal link, spans, and navigation, right? So let's not even do this part yet. Go to this part, and that would be one-on-one right here, right? So, oops, comment out. Like that. There we go. So let's just look at the test. This is the second test. So it is basically checking that each of these spans contains some text. We can hover our mouse over it, and we can see exactly what's being checked over here. And the way you would do that is, okay, here is our nav link. So that's kind of like this side get by side. We want to do another variable assignment for the within syntax. So that may be a little extra. And we are just mapping or for eaching through that array, just making sure that some span has some text in it. So one of those array elements. So one-on-one, that also translates pretty nicely. After that, we click on the nav link. To do that, use the user event API from RTL, and you have to wait it. And then you can check the route you're on. So once we click on anything here, basically, when that is quite simple, what we're doing is we're just clicking this, and we're making sure that on the bottom, we are in this route that is basically the base route. That is all there is to this test. And the beautiful thing is that you can just go around and click and ad hoc, and that gives you so many ideas to write tests versus you barely got this component to work with your full application. It's already there, and testing is an afterthought. That's the message here. If it's a simple test, they're going to be very similar, slightly different APIs, variable assignments, async awaits on the left side, change syntax, and some jQuery syntax on the right side. Simple tests are easy. Let's go to the second test. So let's take a look at something called navbar component. Navbar, so Cypress on the right, React testing library on the left. So as the components gets a little more complex, you'll see the benefits of the API, right? The API style is going to be a little more advanced. So let's just run this one. So we know exactly what we're seeing here. So navbar is that thing on the left. You have different entities like heroes, villains, and you can see me just ad hocing right now. I'm clicking different things. I can see the time travel debugger populating those routes. So when you click on something, you should be on the matching route. And what you clicked on, what you hovered on, should be highlighted, and everything else should not be highlighted. So this brings up an interesting defect I ran into while working on the book, right? I was writing TDD, and I was basically all the way up here, right? None of this was there. None of this was there, right? And as I ran that, the test passed, obviously, but I realized, hey, everything's highlighted all the time. If you look on the React testing library site, you can see that too. It tells you, hey, class has active link. But that's not very easy for me to recognize. I can have the visual feedback and immediately see, oh, I should write a test for this. I have something not working correctly. And that is just giving me that quality of the feedback, just improves TDD and early defect detection, right? I'm not leaving this to anybody else because I have the immediate feedback right here, right now. Let's check out this test. So we have the render, that's the same, mount is the same. Go line by line, right? So here there's a paragraph with a menu. So the equivalent of that is right here. So let's just take a look at that. Where's that paragraph right here? Okay, menu, list, children. So yeah, that's that. So we're basically checking that this item is there. And then we are making sure we have this menu list, right? So on the Cypress side, you can use the jQuery children API, just finds everything under it. And we're double checking that, whatever the routes array is, it's like 4 items over here, has that link. Yeah, you have to do a little bit of wrangling with RTL, but it's possible. You can do it too. That's no problem. Right after that, so basically until here, and these 2 lines are the equivalent things. The next line, we're saying within this menu list, just make sure that all these array items are there, right? We're just doing routes for each, and within that menu list, make sure that every item's there. And we don't really have to do that exactly on the Cypress side because we have a possible easier href selector. So we can just loop through the array and make sure that we're clicking each one. So that's kind of equivalent of doing that. The cool thing here is that there's an easy way to do this at each syntax with Cypress. You can also have that at each syntax, by the way. Gleb wrote a nice plugin to be able to do that, but it's the only way you can do this. What we're doing here is basically we're clicking through each one, right? Just click through that. We're clicking through each one and making sure that what we clicked on has active link. So that's the defect I was talking about. Everything I click on has active link. The problem is that everything else is also having active link. So the way you would do those 3 lines here is kind of like this section and this section, right? So you identify your active link, you click on it, you wait for it to have the class active link, and then you expect to be on a certain route. That's kind of inbuilt with the API. Intent is the same, but the way you get there is a little shorter on the right side. And to eliminate that defect, I ran into this neat little jQuery selector. Basically says, and actually I can just show exactly what it says. So if we go to the siblings API, right, and then we turn off the highlights. So the siblings of what here is these 3 things, right? What I didn't click on are the siblings. So these 3 things right here, and it highlights those for you right there. So those guys should not have class active link. That's super fluent, easy English, right? But it's just right there. We'll do the same thing with RTL, but it's going to take some wrestling, okay? So the point we're making here is that as soon as your components get a little more complex, you'll see that the APIs are quite different, right? And I've been through more than 50 examples, RTL versus SciCT. It's almost always that you'll have less code on the right side, and you'll do the same thing with less code. All right, let's go to the final example. This one is a parent component. And let's see, this one was called Heroes. It's a little more complex. So Cypress, and you can make your test, Heroes, you can make your test as complex as black box or as white box test, as you want. Okay, so Cypress doesn't dictate, hey, this should be, this kind or that kind. It can be just as complex as a mini end-to-end test. Okay, so I'll just do just this one little part. So let's just first have a look at these tests side by side.
Hey, Murat.
Yes.
Sorry to mess up your workflow. Do you mind increasing the size of the?
Well, I'll get there. I'm not there yet. I'm not looking at the code yet. So I just want to have a big overview of how much code difference there is doing the same thing. So it's almost like we're at 60% with Cypress, and we'll see why. So let's just zoom in. I'm going to only run this little throw, this minify. Just minify this here like this too. Let's just run this simple test here. So all we're doing here is we'll just show the component test so that's easier. We'll go to the specs. This is Heroes component. So in the Heroes component, all we want is we get some data from the network. So we're just stubbing that out. That there is some list. And that first test, all it's doing is it's just clicking this plus button, and we're making sure that we're at the add hero route. And we're clicking the refresh button and making sure we're at the heroes route. That's all it's doing. So let's just go through that and compare to RTL side by side. 200 flows right here. Okay, so that would be just this guy, right? And that's just to be fair, right? We can do a screen at debug here to see how it's looking. And we're going to show more P heroes.test. Select a test. It's up a little bit. Right. I mean, you'll get the output, but perhaps it's not as easy. I mean, there's some stuff in there. There's a big list, right? Some stuff is going on. You have to fold down, but since it's a little more complex, right? I mean, that's all we had before. So let's just go through one by one. So we're making sure that this list header is that the top one, the list header is there. So 101 can be compared there. The hero list is visible. So we populated some heroes, and that's that. And we click on, let's say, add button. And here is just, we're clicking on the add button. So 101, same thing. And we just make sure that we are in the add hero route. Same thing with the Cypress side. We're just making sure that you're in the route. We click the refresh button, and we're just making sure that we're at a certain route. Okay. The interesting part here is we have the site intercept, right? And all it does is it says, if you hit the heroes route, use this JSON file, which has a list of these heroes. And that is what allows us to populate all this list full of heroes. Okay. Now, how do you do this on the RTL side? If you've been through Epic React, one of the main teachings of Kent over there is to avoid testing implementation details. So Cypress does allow you, just like Jest does, to test the implementation details. So here you can spy on use state if you want, and then you click the save button and you ensure that it's called. You can spy on React query, use query client. You can even go more detailed and spy on your custom hook that it's called when you click the save button. So idea is to avoid this and test the consequence of this action, clicking the save button. So what should happen when you hit the save button? A post request should be going on the right side. And that is the idea. You handle that with site intercept. The way you would do the same thing on React testing library side is using this amazing tool called MSW. They're very comparable with Cypress Intercept at MSW. It's the only alternative I know out there. And that it allows that kind of a testing where you're not worried about the implementation details. So site intercept looks like that, easy case. Getting heroes route, give me that. Heroes JSON, that's just a 3-liner. The way we do that with mock service worker is first we have to identify these handlers. So it says when you hit the heroes route, run this callback, and the callback has a status there, so return to under status, and use this heroes data, which we imported all the way here in the beginning. So that's the same thing as that. Now, the difference in site intercept, though, and let's just talk about the second test now. So this one is actually a little more interesting. Right? Let me just demo this with SciPy so we know exactly what's doing. So with the happy path test, there's an end-to-end test for this already that is deleting a hero, launching this model, all that good stuff. So with this test, all we want to do is the negative cases. So what we do is we click on the first delete, okay, the model launches, and now we want to click on no, just to make sure that the model goes away when we click on no. And this is not something that we want to bother in an end-to-end test, right? We can just do it in that low level. So then we click on no, no buttons there, and we make sure that the model goes away, right? So that's the first little part of the test. In the second part of the test, we invoke delete again, right? Delete flow, and the model comes back. So here, what we did is we stopped the network to return a non-200 response so that we can check at the end that we have this error message. So we are basically testing error boundary feature of React, okay? What allows that non-200 feedback is obviously site intercept. Any delete request that's going anywhere, we say, okay, just return 500, okay? And then we click on the yes button, invoke the model, and then we make sure that that model goes away once we click the delete, and then we get that feedback. One-on-one is the same thing in React Testing Library side. So first we make sure that the model dialog is there. We invoke the hero deletion, and that's the same two-liner that you see over here. I click on delete button, the model should be visible. And we click on button no, model goes away. We click on button yes, and we have some error in there. What allows that is, again, mock service worker. This time we're doing a delete, and then we're returning a status 400. This will also be 500, doesn't make any difference, and returning an error. And you can see, you can just drop in that site intercept anywhere you want, right? Usually with mock service worker, what you do is you have all these network stubs in one file. It's not very easy to, if you want to do an edge case, as you're going along, hey, I want to just test the non-200, you're going to have to work for it. It's not impossible, but you're going to have to work for it. Versus with Cypress intercept, you can see the API, just a three-liner over here. You can swing it, you can make it anywhere you go as you're identifying that test. So we have the handler here, but that's not enough. We have to set up the server before these tests run. We have to start listening there. And then after all, so there's some boilerplate. Now, it's not impossible to do these things, but there's some boilerplate. So try it out. Let me know what you think. But for me, I think Cypress intercept has an edge over here. Right? Let's skip that one and look at the final test that we're gonna do. So this is basically testing error boundary and suspense at the same time. Okay. So here, let's just minify this part, expand this, and I will just comment out some code so we don't even have anything. So let's just run this test by itself so we see what we're talking about. So as we mount the component, we just introduced a delay. Okay. We are going to mock the network. It's going to return a 400. But for now, we just are controlling the clock and making sure the spinner is showing up. Okay. What allows that? So in the first line, this basically says there's going to be a 400 response. And usually what Cypress does is if there is a network error like that, it's going to fail the test. We're saying, hey, that's okay. Don't fail the test when it happens. We're saying we're going to control the clock and we're going to stop the network saying, if you hit the heroes route, return a 400, but also have this little delay so we can see that spinner. That's all it is. And we're just mounting the component. There's nothing here. We didn't even start testing anything. So you can imagine, I'm trying to get this error boundary to work, and then maybe you add a failing test, and then you go and try to make that error boundary work until this one passes. So it's perfect TDD. You exactly know what's going on. The experience isn't so much like that on the left side. So you set up your handler with this get. If you hit the hero's route, return a 400 response. So that's good. And this line is also a mock service worker. So is this line. So this much for the mock service worker version versus the site intercept portion over here. At the end, you have to clear some things too. After that, we start just use fake timer. So that is the same thing as cyclock. And then we can visually check the spinner. That line translates one by one, one-on-one, right? But the perk here is that we know exactly what's going on in the browser. So if we say, hey, in 5 seconds, because this is the behavior of Axios, we only know so because we have this browser, right? So if we introduce this right here, we're going to see that Axios is trying to get something and it's trying again, and that didn't work. So we extend the timer by another 5 seconds. Again, Axios is going to try 4 times, right? 1 second, let's correct this. So Axios, the behavior of Axios, we only know this because we're in the real browser. It's going to try once and then 3 retries, and at the end, it's going to say, hey, I can't reach this thing. There you have your error component. On the left side, the experience is quite different, right? Because you're literally in the dark, right here. Let's run this. So the problem, actually, the challenge there is to get rid of that spinner, right? You will see this spinner, okay? But to make that go away is the real challenge, because like, I don't know how Axios is working, right? The only way I would get this to work is after I make everything work, and then I feed in the dump, and then I write the test. But in order to really get it to not render, right, you'll have to use a utility from Kent, right? Wait for element to be removed, and that basically says there's this page spinner thing. Wait until it goes away, and you have a timeout, right? And after that, take advantage of that. After that, you might see, and it's still there. Save again. Yeah, okay, now you get there. So you are literally in the dark trying to find your way through. I mean, it's okay because there's 3 things working together. There's Jest, there's RTL, there's mock service worker. Yes, you can make them work together, but it's not easy. And you're in the dark. So on the left side, you kind of fall into testing as an afterthought. On the right side, you are basically using the tool as your design tool. That's all I wanted to share, and I'm almost at half hour. And Q, I let you share your desktop, and you can take a look at the questions right after this one.
Awesome. Yeah, man, you killed off a lot of stuff that, I mean, I don't have to repeat a lot of it now, so.
Easy mode.
But now we get to go on to the fun framework and look at some Angular. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right, so this is actually Murat's product that he created in Angular a long time ago. I took over it not too long ago, and I haven't done much improvements to what it looks like, but for the most part, I'm going to just show 3 components and how you would test them in Angular. I don't do a lot of stuff that Murat did in my components. Typically in an Angular component, you're going to have a lot smaller components and use some type of atomic design principle to create smaller components that are built upon. So in our case here, you can kind of see my screen here where we have the structure, of the different types of components that we're looking at. We're going to mostly be caring about the banner, the dashboard hero component, so these individual buttons. And then there's one more that's not on this view, that's on the about page, which kind of has an HTTP route on it. But one of the cool things about Angular is that there's so many ways to test these components because of the way things move and flow. Generally, if you're using Angular out of the box, you're going to be using Jasmine and Karma usually to do component testing. And out of the box, that does use a test bed that's using a DOM structure as well that you're pasting your components into. And if we were to just run a ng test here, you could actually get a spit out of the components. You actually go and look at those. The cool thing about Cypress, though, is that you actually can maintain the state here. You don't get the ability to use a GUI to travel across the different parts of the application to view those tests. So if we're wanting to do component testing, which would be the opposite, or I wouldn't call it the opposite, but I guess juxtaposed to component or to unit testing, I don't care about the functionality of my component test. I care about the actual element itself, or at least that's how we do it at my place of work. So generally, I'm concerned about what this looks like and how it behaves, and what these inputs and outputs do and how they behave. So if I had a PO or a manager that said, "Hey, developer, I need you to create a banner for for our page. So I need this. I need it to be green. I need it to be a font size of this. I need particular ARIA elements added to it." You wouldn't test those in a unit test. Typically, I'm going to test functionality. before we could mix and match our functionality and our component definition rules inside of our styles and templates, but those aren't very performant, and you don't get a lot of visual help to go through in time travel and whatnot while you're debugging or while you're doing TDD. Murat actually did an amazing presentation at the test summit not too long ago, last week, talking about TDD and component testing, and that's actually a pretty similar format of how I do it. This is generally how we would use our component test before. And if you pull down this repo, you would actually be able to look at each step individually. I think Murat has something similar to his as well. So each step is numbered to compare each individual thing. So we have Jasmine and Karma on the left and Cypress on the right. On the left, the first thing is we have to compile our components to test them originally out of the box. So every test needs to have some type of global variable that you can reference in each test. Here, I'm going to test the banner component. I need to declare it. Same with the fixture. I'm going to spin up a fixture before every test using the test bed and compile it onto the page. If you go into, we can kind of look at this really fast. And it'd be really, really fast because these things shoot out really quick.
From line 10 to line 32, you're basically setting up the component.
Right. Yeah, I don't even know if it's going to give me what I want here. It probably won't. No. But generally what's going to happen is it's going to spit out each thing. I need to do this for every single test. And so if you, like I said, you pull these down, you can kind of see how these work. In order to compile the components, I have to create a test bed, and it needs to import its dependencies, and it needs to also have, if you had any providers or modules that needed to be added to the component as well, then you would throw that all in this await block here. The opposite, and as Murat already showed in his part, with Cypress, I just need to do a side.mount. If there are any extra functionality that need to be added, I mean, you can. There is a second parameter you can pass in here that will take in imports, component properties, declarations, and providers as well. But generally speaking, I don't have to do much of that. And it's really easy. If I need to make special modifications per each test, I can just do a side.mount at the top of every test. So you can see here, I'm doing that. It doesn't take a lot of space to do a single line to create custom properties in each test. Here you can see the tests are pretty simple, and you can do the single assertion if you want for every test, or I know the best practices for E2E is we don't care about small specs, just throw it all in one spec. The cool benefit about the component testing is that you do get the benefit of just saying, I want to just test this H1, and I want to test that the text is exactly what I want here. So here I can say, I want to get an H1 that's going to have the text test of heroes. Karma makes it a little more difficult, where I have to use the fixture, grab a debug element, query it by using CSS. You can use the component too if you have a child component, or you can use a direct, I think it's directive is what it is. It's by directive by CSS. And there should be one more. It might just be CSS and directive. I could have sworn there was a third. But either way, I need to grab a reference to that element. It will then give me an element ref, which then I would pull the native element from it to access the header, and then I have to use an inner text to then test that. The test of heroes is what comes from the header. So you can see just right off the bat, it's a lot easier just to blurt this thing out extremely quick, and it's whoever pulls this down knows exactly what H1 and this is without having to figure out like, oh, this is how I get in H1. Another cool thing here is when using Jasmine and Karma, or even Jest even with Angular, one of the things you have to do is update state whenever you make a change to the component. So here, every time I'm doing a test, I'm saying I want to get a component. Since this one here doesn't really matter too much, but if I were going to set something on the component, which you can see here, I'm going to change the state in the component to be this is a test. And then I'm going to grab the header, and then I'm going to do a detect changes, which means I'm going to force change detection on Angular to grab an instance or the new instance of the component. I need to update the component. So if I don't run this and then I run the test over again, I should get a failure now because I don't have this. Yeah, now I get a failure that change detection didn't run. So it should say that this tour of heroes is still tour of heroes, even though I changed it to this as the test. With Cypress, it just handles it itself. So I can make that change here. I can just pass in this is a test, and without making any change to change detection or letting change detection know that something's happened, it just knows that that worked. And we can actually see that in action over here. Whoops. So here we do mount the component and it just works right off the bat. I don't have to do anything special to that component. The other thing here is that the mount flexibility in Cypress is pretty legit. You can, instead of using the class instance of the component in your mount, you can also use a string instance, which is pretty much what Murat was showing over and over. I don't have to do this and pass in any other properties. I can just say, give me this particular selector in Angular, and I can pass any inputs into it. I can also provide outputs and test those. I don't have a preference. I talked to Jordan about this last night about like what feels more natural to a developer. We both agreed that using the class instance is cooler for us Angular guys, but I mean, this does work just fine and it's a little quicker. It makes it a little more difficult to change it on the fly if you want to make anything creative in your component test. But generally, if I'm testing one assertion in each spec, then I'm just going to probably use that and use the component properties in there as well. Let's see, the next thing in this file is style testing. I actually have to skip this one. So just like Murat had in his, I have a bug where this particular style or this particular test doesn't work. I'm not sure why it doesn't work. Because generally speaking, you should be able to just test that a style and the color works. Actually, in the latter test, it's going to give you a spoiler. I do the exact same thing for a background color and it works just fine. This test passes. But for whatever reason, trying to do something similar here, it's the exact same test. I want to test that the font color is green. And I can clearly assert that that H1 should have a CSS color of green. This one is grabbing an H1 element, just like I'm grabbing H1 everywhere else. And I'm saying the style should be green. So it's just a weird bug. If someone can fix that and let me know how, that would be awesome. The next set of tests are
what you're looking at is actually it's so easy to do that with Cypress component testing, right? It's just sad that you have to try so hard.
Yeah, you have
in the dark.
Yeah, it took me. I just, like I said, like I skipped it because it was taking way too long for me to try to figure out. I wanted to say that it should be color green, but you can't do that with this, and I feel like I'm doing it a disservice. But I mean, you can kind of see even if you ignore the amount of docs inside of this on both sides, they both have a similar amount of explanation. The amount of code difference is pretty staggering. Like 30 lines for something as simple as like the component is literally that. So it should be, and I could add a lot more to this if I wanted to do some accessibility as well. I should be able to assert. I'm getting H1, so I know that I'm testing the ARIA stuff there. I wanted H1 on this banner every time. So we're getting that type of stuff if someone goes in and changes it to an H2. The next one is the dashboard hero, which is a little more of the same. This one does have an output, which is the main thing that I wanted to showcase on this one. But
can you show the component test in Cypress so we can like get familiar with the component, like see it in our browser?
Sure.
Just run it for you.
This one is the buttons that I showed at the beginning. So each individual button is what I'm testing. So the component in Angular would just be that button. If I wanted to do an integration test, I could. I would use Cypress for that as well. So kind of what you showed, how you were doing the HTTP requests and whatnot. But generally in our product, we wouldn't do that. We would just test. When I'm making the button, I would just do that. And then in the parent component, maybe in dashboard, I would maybe show how each of those buttons work together.
Right,
but again,
that's something you do at parent, right? Not
right. Exactly. So here, there are some things here that I do want to test for. Let's say I have a theme in my company that we have this colored blue buttons, and I do want to be able to pass text to the button to show it's showing flash here. Maybe there's a default, maybe there's some accessibility things here, but we do know that when the button is clicked, we do want to show, we do want the event to be triggered. Cypress adds a really cool feature with Angular that I was actually extremely shocked with when I saw it, because it was just kind of cheat mode. Because let's first start with the one on the left. If I have a output, and this is the output testing here, you can create a spy, and I put in here, this may be a hot take, but when I am making a spy, I don't like to spy on something in my component instance. It just feels weird to me. I would typically spy on something external. I do know that the selected is coming from like RxJS, and that's why I'm testing the emit function instead. But generally, I wouldn't want to do this in my component test, but you kind of have to, because there's no way to do it any other way. So here we have to use a fake async, or you could use async and use a fixture when stable to test that the output actually made a change. But I use fake async here because I think the syntax is a little cleaner. Again, I have to modify the state before the default. So I'm going to set a hero to a mock hero, which is a hero object, which has an ID and a name of flash. So I'm spying on it. I'm going to grab the element from my DOM. I'm going to click the element. I'm going to simulate time passing until the event runs. And then this is going to do and expect that the component.selected, the emit function has been called once. I do the once just because I don't want to simulate some weird memory leak where I click it one time and 50 clicks happen. So I want to make sure that I'm testing it once and that the event does pass back the mock hero object. With Cypress, you get a little cleaner syntax here, where if I'm passing in this dashboard hero component, you can just say auto spy outputs. I don't need to do anything crazy. I can just say I want to spy on every single one of the outputs in my component. And the way you reference those is just by whatever the property name is. You're just gonna throw a spy at the end of it. So I have this selected property and just throw a spy on the end of it. And I can spy that the selector or that the property was called one time with the mock hero. That's it. You can get clever with it if you want to, and you can add a property for it is selected. And then you could say like it's create spy object or create output spy, sorry. And then I could say like foo spy and get rid of this. And then do a foo spy. And then I can run that test. I need to refresh. And you see that this foo spy here was called here, and I clicked it. So I mean, I don't want my events to actually run in my component test anyway. So generally, I'm just going to do an auto spy output because it's just a cleaner experience. And I mean, I think that is one of the more powerful features that they gave us inside of the Angular portion of it.
You show the karma test on the left again?
Yeah.
So you don't have to do a fixture detect changes. Spying is kind of like a one-liner versus those component that hero, mock hero, and spy on, right?
Yep.
And then
yeah,
I mean, worry about tick, right?
Yeah, those are all bonuses. If we really wanted to, I wouldn't have to. I could throw this in a before each because it's technically the exact same structure. I could just auto spy inputs there and throw this. I kind of gave Jasmine a bone there to make the test look similar in length on this one.
But it's actually a two-liner, right? It's a two-liner.
It's actually just 2 lines of code and then the definitions there. It's extremely powerful to be able to test something like that quick. The last thing is pretty much what you showed already. I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this about component. You can see that the component has another component, a child component inside of it. So this would be something closer to I'd call this like a container component that just has a bunch of presentational components inside of it. I wouldn't typically write the code this way. I would have something passing into this or something. Also, way back, I'm making a lot of assumptions here and assuming that everyone's using standalone components. You could still be using module based if you're using the Cypress testing or component testing with Angular 13. But 14, when you're using standalone, of course, you're going to have true. And the only difference is that instead of declaring your component inside of the component test, you would be importing it like I'm doing in all of the tests. That's the only difference. The last one is just the custom mounting. Again, I created a custom mount for those standalone components that are pages. So if I'm routing to a page, I need to be able to provide or import the HTTP testing module. So instead of, oh, that doesn't work. I'm gonna have to actually go to it. I think it's component.ts. So similar to what he showed in React, we have, oh, this is kind of small. We have a interface here that we just kind of extend on. So by default, you get a mount property that you can mount all your components to. Here I created one that's just a mount with HTTP. And what's cool about it is I can always assume or always prepare that HTTP client testing module will just be added onto the components that I'm going to be injecting. Here I'm just saying, custom. This is actually in the documentation. Don't have to. This isn't any kind of special code that I came up with. But it's going to take in the components config that's being mounted, and it'll just use the spread object to iterate over its import and then add our imports to it. And you can actually add as many as you want here. The same applies to any other type of config portion or properties. So if I need to do something with declarations or providers, I can preset certain ones to be added to it and just mount from that. And the way you do that is just adding it to the command list in Cypress. Another cool thing, just so it doesn't look like I cheated too much, is that I did use the chai.use and just use the chai colors to get the colors to work. I think out of the box, you have to use RGB commands for Cypress to test colors that way. But chai.use allows you to just override that and use colored instead.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, that is a cool cheat that is awesome to come through with.
That's not only Angular, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, you need and
then I think I did show the about component is pretty similar. Like these, it's not gonna run. Mine is weird because of the security thing. They both pass as well. So the tests again are extremely simple. Atomic components make component testing out of the box, or TDD with those things are extremely easy to do, and I recommend doing that. And this is the way to do it going forward.
Amazing. I mean, the feedback that you get from the component. There's a quote I like from Dave Farley, who I follow. It says,
Yep.
Engineering is about learning, and good engineers optimize to be great at learning. And you do that with quality feedback and iterating quickly. So once you have that feedback, you see the component, you can ad hoc it, you have your dev tools, you have your extensions. I mean, it just takes a mediocre front-end engineer and makes them a rock star. Right? Forget about testing. That feedback is just what changes the whole game.
Nice.
Testing just comes natural. Just fall into it. Oh, I have this thing here. I might as well do it.
I think the problem is that testing is never fun to most developers, because it's just it takes time from us creating features. But and this is something to get excited about. The ease of use and the flexibility of Cypress now with the component integration and end-to-end testing abilities are all extremely nice.
Yeah, I mean, my negotiation with developer buy-in is, forget about testing, just mount the component and play with it. And then you're like, oh, okay, might as well just do one or two things. Yeah. Like, I mean, because it's basically like storybook. Right, and you have tests, right? Yep. But with much simpler syntax. Like with React Kit is the same thing that you mount your root application, you just mount it the same way as Cypress.
Right on.
All right.
All right, Ronald, was there any pertinent questions, or are we good to call it?
Yeah, first of all, just want to give both of you kudos and round of applause for everything that you ran through. I feel like in this 1 hour, I've literally learned the most I've learned about Cypress. Also wanted to let the audience know that we do have a quick survey if you'd like to take that about the speaking event today. Also, join us in Discord. And then the one question that we did had came from Alex, I believe. He was asking, doesn't RTL wrap user event calls in ACT, which ensures the flushing of state updates? Murat,
So
I
this
believe
is
that was
not
for you.
RTL, but I think this is Enzyme. So we use Enzyme at Extend, our company, who I work with Alex. We have really nice cutting edge tech stack, but our unit test framework is a little outdated. So you have to do exactly the same thing Q was showing with flushing, right? So that is ACT in Enzyme. You don't have that problem with React testing library. One of the reasons why React testing library is so much better than Enzyme, right? I think you, on the Angular side, I don't know if there's ability to do this, but if you use Spectator, maybe, right? That's a Karma alternative. So it's kind of like the RTL of Angular world, but you don't have to worry about any of this with Cypress component testing. So in our company right now, the decision is, hey, what should we do after Enzyme? Should it be React testing library or should it be Cypress component testing? Of course, I mean, we can take the horse to the water, but we can't make them drink it. So it's got to be their decision, right?
Right.
I mean, I want to just end with saying, like, I worked on as a developer with Angular for 2 years, right? I only worked with React for 1 year, and in this time, it was Cypress component testing in React, which was in beta. But I learned so much thanks to the feedback I'm getting from Cypress component tests that at the end of the 1 year, I was able to write a book about React, right? Today, I know so much more React than I knew Angular, thanks to Cypress component testing. If Angular component testing with Cypress was there when I was learning Angular, I know so much more Angular. So just using that tool that gives you so nice feedback is just going to amplify your engineering. Forget about testing. Testing just happens by itself when you're in that tooling environment. Right? Just amplifies your engineering, takes it to the next level. So your B-listers become A-listers, your A-listers become rock stars, your C-listers become B-listers. It just takes the team to the next level.
Hey, the Angular bandwagon isn't full, man. There's always room on it for you to come back.
Well, we'll see. I'm kind of interested in Vue too. It would be nice if someone did a Vue version of this. You are on the hook for writing a book about TDD with Angular.
a whole book, huh?
It's already been done. You have the code, you have everything. Just start the book now. Teach everyone what you know.
All right, I'll come to you for advice on that.
The book is already there. You can just pick up that one. It's easy. You have everything. All right.
Awesome.
All right, guys.
Well, yeah, we can conclude it. Just real quick, for people that want to, follow you, whether that be Twitter, in GitHub itself, or Discord, like, where's the best place for folks to find you, contact you, join the Angular bandwagon, whatever they want to do?
For me, it is, I'll post it in there. It's Tipster22. You can find me on Twitter. My DMs are open, so slide in there anytime if you want.
My Twitter and YouTube, and it's all. I'm LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere, Discord.
All right, sounds good. But yeah, thank you everybody for attending. We will catch you next time. Have a good one. Peace.